Hey everyone, my name is Alexandra Thompson, and I'm a current third-year animal science major here at UGA. I'm from a ranching family in California, so I wanted to take some time to educate y'all on prussic acid poisoning, which is a very dangerous and unfortunately common ailment here in SoCal. Prussic acid poisoning is a deadly vicious cyanide overdose caused by ingesting forages that have high levels of cyanogenic glucosides. Cyanide poisoning is especially deadly to ruminants, and I'll explain a little bit more on why on the next slide. So how do our cyanogenic glucosides build up? They build up in forages commonly during the summer and winter months, and this is because these are times of physical and environmental stress. For me in California, extreme drought is a factor in almost every summer we have, and so this has lasting effects on our forages for the next few months. For y'all in Georgia, I know that during the winter months, frost and freezing is always a concern, and this has lasting effects on y'all's forages as well. Physical damage is another way that forages can build up cyanogenic glucosides. And this is because when a forage endures these stressors, the plant cell walls of these plants break down and release these cyanogenic glucosides as a defense mechanism. When a cow eats these forages that have been under physical stress, the rumen microbes in their gut create cyanide when degrading this forage. Then the rumen passes on the cyanide to lower digestive tract, and it causes a lot of havoc from there. The effects of prussic acid in the gut are extreme, and cyanide prevents cellular respiration in animal cells. So ultimately, if it gets as far as the lower digestive tract and overdoses the animal, it blocks the reduction of oxygen to water and suffocates the animal at a cellular level from the inside. Our signs and symptoms will generally occur within 15 to 20 minutes of consumption of a bad forage, and these include pretty violent ones: thrashing, spasms, collapse, difficulty breathing, cherry red blood, foaming at the mouth, convulsions, and ultimately, most of the time, death. As you can see in the picture on the left-hand side, this cow has some blood around her nose and her eyes are rolled back in her head, and that blood is pretty red. So you can tell she has had way more cyanide than she can handle, and ultimately she has died from it. As I said before, our signs are visible almost instantaneously after ingestion. So you have to catch them quick because cattle can usually die within the hour if they're not treated. And even when they are treated, treatment does not necessarily guarantee their life. There are a lot of forages that are susceptible to prussic acid buildup, especially in areas that have high levels of drought and or frost and freezing. The main ones are usually immature forages. So if you are feeding your cattle in a pasture that has young forages with a lot of leaves, the glucosides are mainly in the leaves, not in the flowers. So you're just subjecting them to potential prussic acid poisoning further. As I said before, if you have stressed forages such as drought or frost ridden forages, then you have higher levels of HCN in those leaves as well. Physically damaged forages also usually have high levels of glucosides. So if your forages have been chopped, crushed, torn by anything, they are probably high in HCN levels as well. And one thing you can do to prevent prussic acid poisoning is just feeding hay or baleage, because if you feed them straight into the pasture and it's a young immature forage, you can subject your cattle to further glucoside exposure without even knowing it. Hay or baleage is always a safe option because they've had enough time to dry out and they have less glucosides. Our treatment options are pretty limited, and you have to detect our signs within about 15 to 20 minutes. So if you know what you're looking for, great. But if you don't know it's prussic acid poisoning, you're honestly pretty screwed. The first treatment option that generally works pretty well is an IV administration of 1 milliliter, 20% sodium nitrate, along with 3 milliliters, 20% sodium thiosulfate per 100 pounds of your animal. And this treatment can be re-administered in a couple of minutes, usually about 3 to 5 minutes if no results are seen, because results generally are seen pretty instantaneously. However, you can overdose the cow on sodium nitrate if you keep doing this throughout the hour. So if they are not recovering in about an hour, you need to stop. And unfortunately, your cow's probably not going to make it if they're in that bad of shape. Another last-ditch effort treatment that you can try is pumping diluted vinegar, about 1 gallon of vinegar to 3 to 5 gallons of water, via stomach tube into the rumen. And you can see this demonstrated in the picture on the left, but this just helps reacidify the rumen and reduce your micro production of cyanide. It helps flush the rumen out, but you just got to hope that this flushing decreases the amount of cyanide in the lower digestive tract before it's too late. So really there's no good way to treat cyanide poisoning. There's usually just ways to prevent it. And ways you can prevent it are pretty plentiful. You can avoid grasses that generally have higher levels of these cyanogenic glucosides naturally, like sorghum, Sudan grass, Johnson grass, and young forages with a lot of leaves, especially those who have undergone stressors like physical stress or drying out in a drought or freezing overnight, just things you can do to avoid feeding your cattle bad forage. You can also, as I mentioned before, avoid pasture feeding, which this isn't really an option for most ranchers, but hay or baleage is always safer after a drought or a frost. So if you're questioning your field, it's probably not a great idea to feed it unless you're absolutely sure that the cyanogenic glucoside levels are under control.